Close your eyes and picture the ancient world, gold, marble, silk, and shimmering faces. But behind the elegance was a hidden cost. The powders, perfumes, and rituals of beauty were not harmless. They were dangerous, even deadly. Imagine seeking perfection while each brush stroke brought you closer to harm. Tonight, we'll uncover those secrets together. Get comfortable, relax, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. This is the dark side of ancient beauty. When people today imagine ancient Egypt, the first images that often come to mind are not only pyramids or pharaohs, but also the striking faces that look back from temple walls and painted sarcophagi, heavy black eyeliner that stretched dramatically. Beyond the eyes, shimmering powders dusted over cheeks, and deep colors brushed across the lips. Beauty in Egypt was not merely decoration, it was identity. To be Egyptian, whether rich or poor, was to participate in a culture that believed appearances had deep meaning. But behind the allure of those painted faces lay a much darker truth. The very substances that gave Egyptians their famed elegance were, in many cases, slowly poisoning them. Beauty was not innocent. It was a dangerous ritual, an endless gamble with health in the pursuit of perfection. The fascination with the eyes was at the heart of Egyptian cosmetics. Both men and women rimmed their eyes with thick black lines of kohl, a mixture created from galena, a mineral form of lead. On the surface, this practice seemed practical. Egyptians believed the kohl shielded their eyes from the harsh desert sun and warded off eye infections, and to some extent, they were right. Studies of the compounds show that lead salts in kohl might have stimulated the immune system, offering protection against bacteria. But this benefit came with a deadly trade-off. Prolonged use of lead-based makeup allowed the metal to seep slowly into the body. Over time, this exposure could damage nerves, weaken bones, and create symptoms that no ancient physician could cure. Imagine running a finger along the rim of your eyelid each morning, painting on beauty and unknowingly drawing poison into your skin day after day. The glamour of black-lined eyes came at the cost of hidden suffering. Beyond the eyes, powders, made from malachite, a vivid green copper ore, were brushed across the eyelids to symbolize rebirth and protection. Green was sacred, a color of fertility, tied to the god Osiris. To wear green was not just to look appealing, it was to carry divine energy upon your body. But malachite, too, contained toxins that irritated the skin and eyes. A noblewoman reclining at her mirror, painting her lids with this bright shade, might have felt radiant in the moment, but her skin would redden, swell, and itch from repeated contact. The pursuit of divine beauty etched its price upon the flesh, and still, no one dared abandon it. To forgo cosmetics was to appear unkempt, even un-Egyptian. Better to suffer quietly than to risk appearing plain. The lips, too, became battlegrounds between allure and danger. Ancient recipes for lip colors included red ochre and carmine, the latter derived from crushed insects. These were mixed with fats or resins to produce pastes that gleamed under the desert sun. The effect was captivating, a flush of vitality across the face. But ochre carried impurities, and the fats could rot quickly in Egypt's heat, creating pastes teeming with bacteria. What was meant to seduce could easily inflame the lips, cracking them open and inviting infection. To kiss an Egyptian beauty might mean tasting not only perfume, but decay hidden beneath the sheen of color. Perfumes themselves became another source of hazard. Egyptians adored scents, crafting balms and oils from frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and countless exotic resins. Perfume was not luxury, it was necessity tied to cleanliness, ritual, and even the afterlife. Bodies were anointed for both attraction and spirituality. But many perfumes were heavy with unrefined oils that clogged pores and bred infections. The heat of the climate baked these concoctions onto the skin, trapping sweat beneath. What smelled divine at first could sour quickly, leaving rashes that lingered beneath the golden jewelry. To pursue beauty through scent was also to risk smothering one's own skin, and still, beauty in Egypt was not optional. From the pharaoh to the farmer, everyone painted their eyes. Cosmetics were a social equalizer, and refusing them was nearly unthinkable. Even the dead were adorned with makeup before burial, their faces painted so they might be recognized in the afterlife. Beauty was survival, both in society and in eternity. To live without it was to risk exclusion, ridicule, and perhaps even spiritual danger. So Egyptians embraced their paints and powders despite the costs. Pain was acceptable, even invisible, when compared to the shame of being barefaced in a world where identity itself was tied to the brush. Imagine the scene. A noble woman seated before polished copper mirrors, servants grinding minerals into powders, others mixing pastes with oils in small alabaster jars. She leans forward, her face lit by the desert sun, and a servant carefully traces thick black lines around her eyes. The powder falls in tiny clouds, settling not only on her skin, but in her lungs. The lead and copper sink silently into her body. To the casual observer, she glows with elegance. To her peers, she embodies refinement. But beneath that perfection, her blood quietly fills with poison. And beside her, another woman prepares malachite for her own lids, knowing her eyes will redden and sting, but continuing anyway. This was beauty in Egypt, magnificent to behold, treacherous to wear. The obsession with beauty also extended to the skin itself. Pale complexions were coveted by the upper classes, a sign of wealth and leisure, untouched by the blazing sun of fieldwork. To maintain paleness, some Egyptians used chalky powders made of white lead, a substance deadly in prolonged contact. Each application created an illusion of refinement while embedding toxins into the flesh. Over years, such habits weakened the body, leaving skin thin and fragile, prone to illness. Yet those who wore the powders did so proudly, convinced that appearance outweighed any hidden danger. To be pale was to announce status, and status was survival. Even jewelry, so often seen as harmless decoration, could betray its wearer. Copper and bronze ornaments tarnished quickly, leaving green stains upon the skin. Gold was safer, prized for its purity, but not everyone could afford it. The poor wore cheaper metals, often coated with substances that irritated and infected the skin when sweat corroded them. A bracelet might gleam at dawn and fester by dusk, leaving sores beneath its beauty. Still, no one went without adornment. To walk bare of ornament was to invite disdain. What is most striking about all of this is the silence that surrounded the dangers. There were no treatises condemning cosmetics, No great outcry against their poisons. Pain and illness were endured, quietly, almost as if they were part of the cost of living. Beauty demanded sacrifice, and Egyptians gave it willingly. The woman with the swollen eyelids did not throw away her malachite. She simply reapplied it the next day. The man whose lips, cracked from ochre, still painted them again before walking into the marketplace. In Egypt, beauty was a duty, and duty left no room for complaint. Consider for a moment how different this was from modern views of cosmetics. Today, warnings cover every product. Regulations monitor ingredients, and consumers are armed with information about safety. In ancient Egypt, no such system existed. Experimentation ruled, and tradition enforced compliance. A recipe passed down from mother to daughter was sacred, not to be questioned. And so the cycle of poisoned beauty continued for centuries, embedded into daily life as firmly as farming or worship. Perhaps the most haunting image is that of the painted dead. In tombs across Egypt, archaeologists find faces still adorned, with eyeliner and powders, long after flesh has turned to dust. These painted remnants whisper of a culture that believed beauty was eternal, even as the substances they used betrayed the living. The irony is almost cruel. In striving to preserve beauty, they hastened suffering. The ancient Egyptian painted. Face was not just a symbol of elegance. It was a mask hiding slow decay. And so, the story of cosmetics in Egypt is not one of harmless adornment, but of quiet tragedy. Every painted line, every shimmering shade, every fragrant balm carried within it the shadow of danger. The Egyptians built pyramids to last forever, but they also built a culture where beauty was worth pain, worth risk, even worth death. Painted. Faces gleamed in the sun. Yes, but beneath the surface, poisoned skin told another story, one the ancients never spoke aloud, but which still lingers today in the artifacts they left behind. In the ancient world, beauty was never neutral. It was a statement of who you were and where you belonged. Nowhere was this more true than in Greece and Rome, where skin color became a visible marker of class, leisure, and desirability. To the modern ear, it may sound strange, but for centuries, pale skin was the ultimate symbol of beauty. Not pale in the sense of natural complexion, but unnaturally white, ghost-like, powdered to perfection. This whiteness did not come from nature. It was crafted and forced and maintained through dangerous practices that carried hidden costs. Behind the powdered faces of elegant Roman matrons and the smooth cheeks of Greek, women lay a world where beauty quietly poisoned its wearers. In both Greece and Rome, the logic was simple. Pale skin showed that one was above labor. A farmer working beneath the Mediterranean sun grew tanned and weathered, his skin bronzed by necessity. A woman of high status, however, spent her days indoors, shaded by colonnades and cooled by breezes. Her skin, untouched by sun, announced wealth more loudly than jewelry. To achieve this look, however, was not always easy. Even the wealthiest women found themselves marked by time, the sun, or the imperfections of nature. Thus began a centuries-long obsession with crafting artificial whiteness, using powders and creams that seemed to offer elegance but carried danger within them. The most famous of these cosmetics was ceruse, a substance made from white lead. Applied as a paste to the face and arms, ceruse created a smooth, flawless pallor. To To Roman eyes, it was stunning. A face like marble, a body like a statue come to life. But lead, as modern science knows, is a slow, silent killer. Absorbed through the skin, it seeped into the blood, damaging the nervous system, weakening bones, and ultimately shortening lives. Women of Rome may have thought they looked radiant, but beneath the glow, their bodies suffered. Hair fell out, skin cracked, gums rotted, and fertility declined. Still, Cyrus remained beloved, because beauty always outweighed health in a society where appearance was power. It was not only Roman matrons who indulged in such dangerous routines. Greek women, too, pursued whiteness with equal zeal, using chalk, white clay, and powders mixed with vinegar or oils. The goal was the same: to look untouched, refined, distant from the world of labor. Greek poets praised the fair-skinned maiden as the ideal bride, and sculptures carved from marble reinforced this obsession. Statues gleamed white, not because they were meant to represent real life, but because whiteness had become a symbol of divine perfection. Ironically, we now know many Greek statues were originally painted in vibrant colors, but centuries of erosion stripped them bare, leaving the impression that whiteness itself was eternal. In reality, it was a constructed ideal, one maintained at great personal risk by the women who strove to embody it. These powders did not merely sit on the surface of the skin. Mixed with oils or honey to create creams, they clung tightly, seeping slowly into pores. Women wore them for hours, sometimes days, before washing them off with abrasive substances like pumice or vinegar. The removal itself was damaging, stripping away natural oils and leaving skin raw and vulnerable. Reapplication followed, creating an endless cycle of harm. What began as the pursuit of refinement ended as a prison of dependency. Each layer of white makeup masking not only the natural complexion, but the damage caused by the previous one. The dangers of lead and chalk were compounded by the climate. In the Mediterranean heat, sweat mixed with powders, creating streaks and cracks across the skin. To hide these flaws, women reapplied more, thickening the mask until it hardened into something almost unnatural. Faces became rigid, fixed expressions of whiteness. A smile might crack the surface. A tear might carve a line through the powder, revealing the darker skin beneath. Maintaining the illusion required constant attention, endless jars of cosmetics, and the acceptance of physical discomfort. Beauty was not only painful, it was exhausting. Men, too, were not entirely exempt. While Roman ideals of masculinity discouraged overt cosmetic use, some men applied powders lightly to smooth their complexions. Emperors and actors were rumored to indulge in creams and perfumes, blurring the line between refinement and excess. Criticism followed, of course. Moralists, like Seneca, condemned such vanities as signs of weakness. But the fact remained. Even power could not resist the lure of artificial beauty. And yet the burden fell most heavily upon women, whose value in society was often measured through their appearance. To neglect cosmetics was to risk ridicule. To appear pale and flawless was to secure admiration. Perfumes and skin creams added another layer of danger. To maintain a smooth surface, women mixed animal fats, waxes, and resins with their powders. These concoctions spoiled quickly in the heat, souring into rancid films that irritated the skin. Still, they were applied daily, their stench masked. by heavy perfumes. Scents themselves, though prized, carried risks. Extracts of flowers and spices were mixed with oils in concentrations that caused allergic reactions, rashes, and even respiratory issues, yet no woman dared abandon them. 2. Smell of sweat was to risk social ruin. Better to suffer quietly beneath a mask of fragrance than to appear human. The paradox of Roman and Greek beauty was this. While society praised natural grace, it demanded artifice to achieve it. Philosophers like Plato might extol the virtues of simplicity, and poets might sing of maidens fair by nature. But in practice, every noble woman maintained her arsenal of creams and powders. True natural beauty was rare, and society had no patience for rarity. The standards of beauty were impossible without cosmetics, and so cosmetics became chains that bound women to dangerous routines. The evidence of these practices lingers today. Archaeologists uncovered jars of powders in Roman villas, their contents still faintly shimmering with toxic minerals. Mirrors of polished bronze lie beside them, testimony to hours spent gazing at one's reflection. Even skeletons tell the story. Traces of lead remain in the bones of women long buried, silent proof of beauty's deadly cost. These women sought perfection, but their pursuit etched itself into their very remains, a chemical signature of vanity turned tragedy. One can imagine a scene in a Roman household. A young woman sits by the window, her slave grinding lead into fine powder. She leans forward as a paste is applied to her cheeks, covering freckles and sunburn. She feels the coolness of the cream, unaware of the poison seeping into her blood. Guests will later admire her marble-like complexion, whispering that she looks like Venus herself. She will smile, perhaps proud, perhaps anxious, knowing that her beauty is both her armor and her curse. This is the quiet horror of ancient cosmetics. No whip cracked, no chains bound her, and yet she was enslaved all the same, trapped by standards that demanded she sacrifice health for appearance. In the end, the allure of pale skin and grease. And Rome was not truly about beauty alone. It was about status, control, and survival. To appear pale was to mark oneself as wealthy, desirable, worthy of marriage or respect. To appear sun-darkened was to risk being mistaken for a slave, a laborer, someone of lesser worth. These associations cut deep, shaping choices that endured. For generations, the powders of lead and chalk were not just cosmetics. They were weapons in the battle for social standing. And though they inflicted wounds invisible to the eye, those wounds accumulated silently until bodies broke down under the weight of vanity. Thus, the legacy of whitened skin in antiquity is both haunting and familiar. Even today, beauty industries sell creams that promise lighter complexions, smoother skin, eternal youth. The substances have changed, the jars are modern, but the logic remains ancient. To be beautiful is to suffer is to belong, and to belong is worth the cost. For the Greeks and Romans, that cost was hidden in the powder, a mask of deadly white that dazzled the eye, even as it slowly destroyed the life beneath. In the ancient world, colors were more than decoration. They were power, seduction, identity. To paint the lips red, to flush the cheeks with crimson, to dust the skin with a tint of vitality, was to announce oneself to the world in ways words could not. But behind the seduction of red pigments lay a sinister truth. Many of the most vibrant, alluring colors were mined from the Earth's most dangerous substances. Every smile painted with a crimson sheen carried with it a whisper of death. Beauty was not just costly in wealth or effort. It was costly in health, measured in suffering that crept invisibly beneath the surface. The obsession with red is as old as civilization itself. Across Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, Egypt, India, and China, the color red symbolized life, passion, fertility, and power. Lips tinted with crimson seemed full of vitality, as though blood itself pulsed through them, more vibrantly than in others. To see a woman with painted lips was to see an embodiment of desire, youth, and energy. But how was such color achieved centuries before modern chemistry? The answer was through substances that nature never meant for human consumption. One of the most common pigments was cinnabar, a brilliant red mineral that gleamed like fresh blood when ground into powder. Cinnabar is mercury sulfide, beautiful, yes, but lethally toxic. When applied as a cosmetic, it leached mercury into the body, damaging organs, weakening the mind, and slowly unraveling health. Yet cinnabar was beloved, painted onto lips and cheeks across the ancient world. Roman women adored its sheen, applying it despite complaints of irritated skin and sores. Chinese elites wore it as rouge, associating it with wealth and nobility. To possess cinnabar was to command beauty and prestige, and to wear it was to court danger willingly. Another pigment came from vermilion, also mercury-based, which later became so prized it was called the color of emperors. Its glow was unmatched, a shade so vivid it seemed alive. But like cinnabar, it poisoned those who wore it. Women who painted their lips daily with vermilion unknowingly consumed traces of mercury with every word, every sip of wine, every kiss. Their allure was undeniable, but their health was silently sacrificed. A Roman banquet might glitter with laughter, music, and red-lipped smiles, but beneath the glamour, slow decay spread unseen. Not all reds were mineral-based. Some were drawn from the bodies of insects. In Mesopotamia, and later in Rome, carmine was created from the crushed bodies of cochineal and kermes insects. The pigment produced a deep, lasting red that clung stubbornly to skin and fabric alike. To the eye, it was mesmerizing, but the method was gruesome. Thousands of insects were harvested, dried, and pulverized to produce a single batch. While less toxic than cinnabar, carmine carried its own risks, irritating the skin and lips. Yet it became a staple, a sign of refinement, and a whisper of exotic luxury. The lips of noble women shone crimson, not from nature's blessing, but from the powdered remains of tiny creatures sacrificed in the name of beauty. The dangers of these pigments extended beyond cosmetics. Many were also used to dye fabrics, paint walls, and even color foods. Exposure was constant, unavoidable, and cumulative. For women, especially those of high status, daily use of these pigments built up in their bodies until tremors, weakness, and illness emerged. The connection between beauty and suffering was intimate, inseparable. A woman might be admired for her radiance, even as her body slowly betrayed her beneath the weight of poisoned dot. Consider the rituals of preparation. In Rome, a matron seated at her dressing table might watch as servants ground cinnabar into fine dust, mixing it with vinegar, and oil to create paste. The scent was sharp, the color dazzling. She leaned forward, lips parted, as a servant dabbed it on with a delicate brush. The mirror reflected perfection. Crimson lips, radiant cheeks, eyes shining with kohl. Guests would later whisper about her beauty, the glow that set her apart from others. But what they could not see was the mercury seeping into her veins, building, slowly, inevitably. Beauty had a taste, a price, and she paid it willingly. The allure of red was not limited to women. In some cultures, men too embraced its power. In ancient India, warriors sometimes tinted their bodies with red pigments before battle, a sign of vitality and ferocity. In Rome, actors on stage painted their faces with rouge to appear more expressive under torchlight. Theatrical beauty was as dangerous as domestic elegance. Both demanded sacrifices hidden behind applause and admiration. The crimson charm was universal, its danger ignored in favor of its allure. But it is striking how knowingly these practices were embraced. Evidence suggests that even when irritation, sores, and illness followed the use of pigments, people did not abandon them. Instead, they believed that discomfort was a natural part of the process, or they sought remedies to soothe the symptoms while continuing the habit. Beauty was never seen as harmless. It was understood, at least in part, to demand endurance. Sore lip was not a warning, but a reminder of the price paid for perfection. The symbolism of red intensified this obsession. In rituals, red was tied to vitality and protection, used in amulets and charms. To wear red on the lips was not merely to attract. It was to shield oneself with the color of life itself. The paradox was cruel. The very pigment meant to represent. Vitality was the same one that drained it away. Ancient beliefs cloaked danger in symbolism, transforming poison into charm. And so the crimson lips that smiled at festivals and feasts were not only objects of desire, but also monuments to a quiet, deadly contradiction. The legacy of these pigments remains haunting. Archaeologists uncovered jars still flecked with vermilion, rouge cakes hardened by centuries, traces of mercury lingering in burial sites. The women who once wore these pigments are long gone, but their bones whisper the story of their suffering. The very substances that made them radiant in life remain as chemical shadows in death, testimony to a beauty that killed silently. What makes this story more compelling is how little has changed. Even today, the cosmetics industry grapples with the dangers of pigments, the risks of contamination, the ethics of sourcing. The desire for crimson lips has never vanished. It has only shifted in form. Modern lipsticks still promise allure, seduction, transformation. The substances may be less toxic, but the logic is the same. To paint the lips red is to command attention, to wield beauty as power. The ancient world did not invent this desire. It merely revealed how deeply humanity is willing to suffer for it. So, when we imagine the crimson lips of an ancient Greek maiden or a Roman matron, let us not see only elegance. Let us see the dual truth: beauty and poison, charm and decay, allure and suffering. The dangerous colors of the ancient world were not accidents. They were choices, deliberate, persistent, and fatal. Every painted smile was a mask, dazzling in its vibrancy, deadly in its substance. And behind those masks lay the quiet tragedy of lives shortened, bodies weakened, all in the name of beauty. If the eyes were the windows of the soul and the lips the seal of seduction, then hair was the crown of beauty in the ancient world. Across civilizations, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from Greece to Rome, hair was never just hair. It was identity, status, and power. A full head of shining locks, carefully styled and adorned, could elevate someone from ordinary to divine in the eyes of others. But just as with skin and lips, the quest for perfect hair often turned dangerous. Behind the curls and braids, behind the perfumes and wigs, lay hidden costs that few acknowledged yet nearly everyone endured. Ancient beauty demanded sacrifice, and the crown of hair was no exception. The ancient Egyptians were masters of hair artistry. They believed that grooming the hair was essential not only for beauty, but for hygiene and spirituality. Elaborate wigs became common among the wealthy, crafted from human hair mixed with plant fibers or even wool. To wear a wig was to display wealth and refinement, and wigs were styled with as much care as the natural hair beneath them. But maintaining these wigs was no simple task. They were coated with oils and resins to keep them in place, substances that trapped heat and sweat. Against the scalp, in the relentless Egyptian sun, the scalp beneath would become irritated, inflamed, and often infected. Lice, ever present in ancient societies, thrived in these conditions, turning elegance into torment. The oils themselves were another source of danger. Egyptians adored perfumed oils, concoctions of castor, almond, or animal fats, mixed with fragrant herbs and resins. These were poured onto wigs and natural hair alike to add luster and scent. While they produced an immediate glow, they also suffocated the scalp, blocking pores and encouraging fungal infections. Over time, the heavy oils weakened hair roots, leading to baldness, the very condition wigs were meant to conceal. The irony was cruel. The more one pursued elegant hair through oils, the greater the risk of losing hair altogether. For men, shaved heads covered by wigs were a sign of cleanliness and control. Priests, for example, shaved their heads completely, wearing wigs as symbols of ritual purity. Yet the very act of constant shaving invited cuts and infections, worsened by the application of perfumes and ointments that were rarely sterile. Beneath the polished surface of wigs and oils was a cycle of irritation and decay, endured silently in the name of beauty and status. In Greece, hair carried equally deep symbolism. Women were expected to maintain long, flowing locks, often braided intricately or bound with ribbons. Loose, shining hair was tied to femininity and fertility, celebrated in poetry and sculpture. To enhance this ideal, women turned to dyes and treatments. Some bleached their hair with mixtures of vinegar and herbs, exposing themselves for hours to the Mediterranean sun while the concoction worked. This process dried the hair, left it brittle, and often caused it to fall out in clumps. Yet light-colored hair became so fashionable that women accepted the damage as the cost of desirability. A Greek maiden with pale golden hair was admired endlessly, her suffering dismissed as irrelevant compared to the beauty she displayed. Roman society took this obsession to new heights. In Rome, hairstyles were statements of identity, shifting with fashion as quickly as politics. Matrons piled their hair into towering arrangements, sculpted with pins, wires, and waxes. Wigs imported from conquered regions, especially blonde hair from Gaul and red hair from Germany, became prized commodities. A Roman woman wearing a blonde wig announced wealth and cosmopolitan taste, even if the wig was sewn from the hair of enslaved women taken in war. The wigs themselves, however, were heavy, itchy, and suffocating. Oiled and perfumed, they often carried lice from their original owners, spreading infestations among the Roman elite. But no one cared. Fashion was worth the torment to die. Their hair, Romans used substances that bordered on the grotesque. Some recipes called for pigeon droppings mixed with vinegar, others for ashes and lead-based powders. Applied daily, these mixtures corroded the scalp, producing sores that oozed beneath carefully styled locks. The smell was foul, but the appearance mattered more. A fashionable shade was worth the suffering it caused. Men, too, participated in this toxic quest for elegance. Julius Caesar, mocked for his thinning hair, was said to style his locks carefully forward, while later emperors were rumored to experiment with dyes to mask age. Vanity was universal, and the poisons of beauty spared no gender. Perfumed powders sprinkled into hair added another layer of risk. Romans adored the scent of roses, lavender, and cinnamon, crushing these into powders and rubbing them into the scalp. While the fragrance lingered, so too did the irritation. Allergic reactions were common, leaving scalps red and blistered. Still, parties demanded beauty, and banquets required perfection. A hostess could not afford to smell of sweat when her hair could carry the scent of roses, even if it burned her skin beneath. Consider the physical strain of Roman hairstyles. Some arrangements were so elaborate that women required servants to construct them daily, braiding, pinning, and waxing the hair into towering designs. The weight alone caused headaches and pulled painfully at the scalp. To maintain the style, overnight, women often slept sitting upright, unwilling to risk collapse of the structure. Sleep deprivation joined the list of sacrifices made for beauty. The hairstyle was not just decoration, it was a burden carried literally upon the head. The social pressure behind these practices was immense. A Roman woman without proper hair arrangement risked ridicule, her peers whispering that she was lazy or careless. A Greek maiden with unkempt locks could be dismissed as unfeminine. An Egyptian without a wig might appear impoverished or impure. Beauty was not optional. It was survival within a system that judged harshly and praised rarely. Every oil, every powder, every wig was a shield, a mask against social failure. The poisons beneath did not matter when compared to the danger of public shame, and yet there is tragedy in the silence of the sufferers. Women whose scalps bled from harsh dyes did not abandon them. Men whose wigs itched with lice did not cast them aside. Instead, they endured, convinced that the suffering was worthwhile. No doctor could cure vanity, and no philosopher's warnings could outshine the lure of beauty. The quiet endurance of pain was itself a ritual, woven into the very fabric of ancient life. Archaeology preserves the remnants of this struggle. Combs and hairpins lie buried in tombs, still sharp after millennia. Wigs rest beside mummies, strands intact, frozen in the styles of the living. Chemical analysis reveals traces of laid-in hair samples, proof of dyes that poisoned slowly, invisibly. Each artifact tells the same story. Beauty demanded loyalty, and loyalty required sacrifice. Irony is inescapable. Hair, meant to symbolize vitality and youth, was slowly destroyed by the very treatments meant to preserve it. The oils that promised luster caused baldness. The wigs that concealed baldness bred infestations. The dyes that promised elegance corroded the scalp. Beauty was self-defeating, a cycle of pursuit and destruction that trapped its wearers in endless contradiction. And yet, to the ancients, it was worth it. To walk into a banquet with gleaming hair, to sit in the forum with golden locks, to stroll the marketplace with fragrant curls. These were victories, small but essential. They announced identity, commanded attention, and offered power in a society where appearances ruled. The pain, the poison, the exhaustion, all were secondary to the glory of being admired, even envied. Thus, the story of hair in the ancient world is not just about wigs and perfumes. It is about the toxic quest for elegance, the willingness to endure suffering for fleeting moments of praise. Hair was a crown, yes, but it was also a chain, binding men and women alike to dangerous practices. The shimmering curls and perfumed locks of antiquity dazzled the eye, but beneath them lay scalps scarred, poisoned, and exhausted. The crown of beauty was, in truth, a burden of pain. To the ancients, scent was not just a luxury, it was a language. Perfume could speak of wealth, seduction, holiness, or refinement. A cloud of fragrance trailing behind someone entering a banquet hall was as powerful as jewels glittering on their arms. To smell of roses, myrrh, cinnamon, or musk was to announce oneself as elegant, desirable, and worthy of admiration. Yet behind the intoxicating allure of perfume lay a truth, both unsettling and dangerous. The ancient pursuit of fragrance often poisoned the body, weakened health, and chained people to substances they could not resist. Beauty was not merely seen in antiquity. It was inhaled, absorbed, and endured. Perfume making in the ancient world was a complex art, blending oils, resins, herbs, spices, and animal extracts. In Egypt, jars of scented oils were as essential to a noble household as bread or wine. Women anointed their hair and skin daily, pouring small cones of perfumed wax onto their heads that melted slowly in the heat, releasing fragrance throughout the day. It must have looked elegant at a distance, a gleaming sheen, a subtle trail of scent. But in reality, the practice was both uncomfortable and harmful. The wax-clogged pores suffocated the scalp and drew insects. Combined with the unrelenting sun, it often caused rashes, irritation, and infections that lingered long after the fragrance faded. Yet women persisted because to be unscented was to risk social embarrassment. The ingredients themselves were often toxic. Many perfumes relied on heavy doses of resins like myrrh or frankincense, substances burned in rituals but also dissolved into oils for skin. Applied daily, they irritated sensitive flesh, leaving red patches that required yet more ointments to soothe. Others used cinnamon oil, highly prized for its warmth and exotic quality, but when applied directly, it burned the skin, creating a painful contrast between allure and agony. Musk, extracted from animals, carried a pungent potency that caused nausea or dizziness in enclosed spaces, yet it was considered irresistible. Perfume was not gentle. It was powerful, overwhelming, An often destructive dot in Greece and Rome, perfumed oils were everywhere. Athletes rubbed themselves with scented oils before and after exercise, believing it refreshed their bodies. Courtesans drenched themselves in perfume to attract clients, layering scent so thick it clung to every fold of clothing. Banquets were filled with bowls of perfumed water, guests sprinkling it on themselves between courses. Romans especially adored imported scents from Arabia and India, trading at enormous costs for the rarest resins and flowers. A vial of perfume could cost a fortune, its rarity elevating it to the level of treasure. But the richness of these oils meant they were applied in excess, soaking into skin and hair until irritation, rash, or illness followed. The method of extraction itself posed dangers. Without distillation, ancient perfumers boiled plants and raisins and animal fats, straining the mixture into heavy unguents. These fats, once boiled, turned rancid in the heat, producing foul-smelling bacteria that flourished unseen. Applied to skin, rancid oils caused infections, acne, and even abscesses. But because the top layer still carried fragrance, users ignored the hidden danger. To smell like roses was worth the price of pustules beneath. The contradiction was sharp. Perfume masked decay while spreading it silently. Perfume was also tied to intoxication. Some scents, when inhaled too heavily, caused dizziness, headaches, or fainting. Guests at Roman feasts often found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer density of perfumes in the air. The mixing of different fragrances, roses, lily, musk, frankincense, cinnamon, created clouds that suffocated rather than delighted. Philosophers like Seneca mocked this excess, claiming that men drowned themselves in perfume, but the critique did little to curb the obsession. In fact, the criticism only proved how central scent was to elite identity. To reek of perfume, even unpleasantly, was better than to carry no scent at all. Consider the imagery of Roman streets. Women in silk robes passing by, leaving behind trails of perfume, strong enough to announce them before they even entered a room. Courtesans competing for attention in crowded forums, each exuding different fragrances to stand out. Men reclining at banquets, their heads adorned with garlands soaked in oil, the air thick with spices and resin. This was not subtle beauty. It was aggressive, intoxicating, and unrelenting. To live in such a world was to live in a haze of fragrance that dulled the senses and coated the body with unseen poisons. Even more disturbing was the use of lead and arsenic in some perfumed powders. In Rome, women dusted themselves with scented, white powders that doubled as both perfume and cosmetic. These powders contained crushed minerals mixed with lead, providing both fragrance and pallor. Every application was a dose of poison, inhaled as dust and absorbed through skin. The fragrance may have been delightful, but the cost was fatal. Modern analysis of ancient cosmetic jars has revealed these residues, silent witnesses to the dangers their owners once embraced. Perfume was not merely about attraction, it was about power. In Egypt, to wear a certain fragrance was to align oneself with nobility. In Rome, senators and emperors perfumed their robes to mark their superiority. A scent could distinguish the wealthy from the poor, the refined from the vulgar. It was an invisible cloak of identity, so essential that going without it was unthinkable. The psychological weight of this expectation ensured that even when perfumes caused suffering, they were never abandoned. Women whose skin burned from cinnamon oil, men whose scalps festered under perfumed wax, all endured, because the alternative was worse, to be ordinary, unnoticed, unscented. The irony is sharpest when considering that many of these perfumes were believed to be medicinal. Raisins and spices were thought to strengthen the body, calm the mind, or even prolong life. In reality, they did the opposite. Long-term exposure weakened lungs, irritated the skin, and sometimes triggered slow poisoning. Yet the belief in their power only reinforced their use. Beauty and health, illusion and harm were woven together so tightly that people could not distinguish one from the other. Archaeology again preserves the truth. Tiny glass vials from Roman villas still carry traces of fragrance. Jars of Egyptian perfumed wax survive in tombs, hardened into cones. Residues reveal the presence of cinnamon, resin, musk, and oils, their dangers hidden but undeniable. The bones of those who wore them often contain signs of lead, proof of powders inhaled day after day. To hold one of these vials is to hold a fragment of elegance, but also a fragment of tragedy. The fragrance may be gone, but the cost remains. And so the story of perfume in the ancient world is not one of harmless luxury. It is the story of a dangerous love affair, where people bound themselves to substances that delighted the senses while corroding the body. The fragrance of danger lingered in every banquet hall, every temple, every marketplace. It coated hair, skin, and clothing, cloaking entire societies in invisible toxins. And yet no one abandoned it, because perfume was not optional. It was identity, seduction, and survival, no matter the price. To walk through an ancient city was to move through a storm of scents, roses, resins, oils, spices, and beneath them the faint undertone of sickness. This was the paradox of the ancient pursuit of beauty. The very substances meant to elevate life carried within them the seeds of decay. The ancients embraced the fragrance of danger willingly, breathing it in with every step, every smile, every embrace, convinced that to smell beautiful was to live beautifully, even if it meant dying for it. Among all the features of the human face, none captivated the ancient imagination more than the eyes. To the ancients, the eyes were not merely organs of sight. They were windows into the soul, mirrors of vitality, tools of seduction, and symbols of divine favor. To enhance the eyes was to command attention, to wield power, and to guard against unseen forces. Across Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, India, and beyond, eyes were painted, darkened, lengthened, and transformed with pigments that promised allure but carried danger. Behind every stroke of kohl, every sweep of shadow, there lay a history of beauty, ritual, and poison. Egypt stands at the forefront of this story, for no civilization is more closely associated with painted eyes. The iconic black outlines of Egyptian art, stretching elegantly from the corners of the eyes in dramatic lines, were not mere artistic inventions. They reflected daily life. Men, women, even children applied kohl around their eyes, framing them in bold, dark rims. To the Egyptians, kohl was more than cosmetic. It was protective. It was believed to ward off the evil eye, to shield against disease, and to reduce the sun's glare in the desert heat. For a culture so tied to the divine, painted eyes were both sacred and beautiful. Yet the very substance that made them so striking was dangerous. Egyptian coal was made by grinding galena, a mineral form of lead sulfide, into fine powder. Sometimes malachite, a green copper ore, was also used, creating greenish hues for variety. These powders were mixed with oils or fats, then carefully applied with small sticks or brushes. The result was stunning. Bold lines that widened the eyes, made them glisten, and gave them a mystical aura. But lead, absorbed daily through the thin skin around the eyes, poisoned slowly. The symptoms: headaches, stomach pain, fatigue, neurological. Damage crept in subtly, unnoticed or dismissed as normal ailments of life. The Egyptians believed coal kept them healthy, yet it was silently undermining their bodies. In Mesopotamia too, eye makeup was common. Women and men darkened their lids with powders of antimony and charcoal, while priests and priestesses used pigments in rituals. Antimony, like lead, is toxic, seeping into the body and weakening the system over time. Yet it was prized for its shimmer, its ability to create a glistening, almost liquid darkness around the eyes. The contradiction is stark. Substances that blinded slowly were used to enhance sight, to make eyes more vivid and compelling. Greece and Rome inherited these practices, though with their own twists. Greek women painted their eyes to appear larger and more expressive, echoing ideals of beauty that valued wide, shining gazes. They darkened their lashes with soot, even using burnt corks or resin to achieve the effect. Roman women, influenced by Egypt after its conquest, eagerly adopted coal, importing it at high cost to paint their eyes in the same dramatic style. A Roman matron reclining at a banquet, her eyes rimmed in black, glittering under lamplight, was as much a product of poison as of fashion. The pigment smeared carefully across her lids contained lead, antimony, and soot, substances that irritated, inflamed, and damaged the delicate tissue around the eyes. In pursuit of allure, women risked the very sense that made them captivating. Even eyelashes were part of this dangerous beauty. Long, dark lashes were admired, so powders and pastes were applied directly to them. Some recipes involved mixtures of soot, ash, and lead, dabbed carefully onto lashes to thicken and darken them. The effect was immediate. Fuller lashes, deeper gazes, but the paste often dripped into the eyes, causing redness, infections, and sometimes blindness. Physicians like Pliny the Elder recorded both the recipes for such cosmetics and the ailments they caused, a testimony to how deeply entangled beauty and harm were in Roman life. The symbolism of painted eyes was as important as their aesthetic. In Egypt, the extended lines drawn from the corners of the eyes resembled the eye of Horus, a symbol of protection and divine power. Wearing kohl was not just vanity. It was a ritual act, a shield against evil spirits and disease. To abandon eye paint was to risk not only social ridicule, but spiritual danger. In India, too, kohl, was believed to protect infants from the evil eye, and so even babies had their eyes lined with toxic pigments. The paradox was cruel. Parents painted their children's eyes to protect them, while unwittingly exposing them to poisons that could weaken their health. The process of applying kohl was itself an intimate ritual. In Egypt, small cosmetic palettes and applicators were placed in tombs, suggesting that painted eyes were as essential in death as in life. A noblewoman preparing for a feast might sit before a polished bronze mirror, her servant grinding galena into powder, dipping a slender stick into the mixture, and drawing careful lines along her lashes. The sting of the powder in her eyes was sharp, but it was dismissed as proof of its power. Pain was folded into beauty, accepted without question. The allure of painted eyes was not reserved for women alone. Men in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even Rome lined their eyes for beauty and protection. Soldiers sometimes painted their lids, believing it reduced glare in the sun and made them appear more fearsome in battle. Priests used eye paint in rituals to signify their closeness to the divine. In these cases, the danger was universal, uniting men and women in shared exposure to toxins for the sake of beauty, power, and belief. The long-term effects of these practices were devastating. Chronic exposure to lead and antimony damaged the nervous system, weakened bones, and reduced fertility. Eye infections became common, and blindness was not rare. Yet the cultural force behind painted eyes was so overwhelming that these risks were ignored. A woman without painted eyes in Rome might be dismissed as plain. A man without kohl in Egypt might be seen as unprotected. The need to conform outweighed the instinct to survive. Archaeological evidence reinforces the extent of this obsession. Thousands of cosmetic jars, applicators, and palettes have been found in tombs and ruins. Some still contain traces of black and green powders, their chemical analysis revealing high concentrations of lead and antimony. These objects speak of lives devoted to beauty, of rituals repeated daily, of dangers endured silently. The shimmering, black lines painted on the walls of tombs are echoes of real faces, painted and poisoned in life. What is most haunting is the resilience of these practices. Even today, kohl remains popular in parts of the world, applied for beauty and protection. Modern versions may be safer, but in some regions, traditional recipes still contain lead, continuing the cycle of danger. The ancient allure of painted eyes endures, unchanged in its promise and its peril. The same lines that once framed the eyes of Egyptian queens and Roman matrons still appear on modern faces, carrying with them the shadow of history. The story of painted eyes in antiquity is thus a story of paradox. Eyes were enhanced to appear alive, luminous, divine, yet the substances used drained vitality, dulled sight, and spread poison. The very windows of the soul were framed with toxins that slowly closed them. Beauty was achieved, but at a price hidden beneath admiration. The painted eyes of antiquity dazzled the beholder, but they carried within them the silent tragedy of lives shortened, vision lost, and health sacrificed. And so, as we imagine Cleopatra gazing out from her balcony, her eyes rimmed in shimmering black, or a Roman matron reclining in lamplight, her lashes darkened and extended, we must see both the allure and the shadow. Their beauty was undeniable, their presence unforgettable, but their radiance was born of poison, their charm laced with danger. The painted eyes of antiquity were not merely ornaments. They were warnings etched in kohl, shimmering in shadow, whispering of the deadly price of beauty. Across cultures and centuries, the color of skin has carried enormous weight. and defining beauty, status, and identity. In the modern world, bronzed or tanned skin may be a sign of health or leisure, but in much of the ancient and medieval past, the opposite was true. Pale, fair skin was the ultimate marker of refinement. A pale face whispered of wealth, of a life spent indoors rather than laboring under the sun. It suggested nobility, delicacy, and superiority. This ideal of fairness inspired countless rituals, cosmetics, and treatments, many of them destructive, poisonous, and even fatal. To appear pale was to appear beautiful, but the path to that appearance was paved with silent suffering. The roots of pale skin, as a standard of beauty, stretched deep into the ancient world. In Greece, poets praised maidens with white, shining faces, comparing them to marble statues. The statues themselves reinforced this ideal. Though originally painted, their surviving whiteness became a symbol of purity and perfection. Roman matrons, too, sought pale skin, seeing it as the clearest sign of aristocratic blood. A woman with sun-darkened skin might be mistaken for a servant or a peasant, so the noble woman shielded herself obsessively, using veils, powders, and ointments to preserve her fairness. To achieve this, women turned to cosmetics that were anything but harmless. The most notorious was white lead, ground into fine powder and mixed with vinegar or water to form a paste. Applied to the face, it created a mask of dazzling whiteness, smooth and glowing under lamplight. The effect was immediate and dramatic, transforming ordinary skin into something ethereal. But beneath the mask, lead seeped relentlessly into the body, poisoning blood, organs, and nerves. Users developed headaches, stomach pain, tremors, and eventually paralysis. Their skin, ironically, often turned gray and decayed, requiring even more lead paste to conceal the damage. The cycle was vicious. Poison caused the need for more poison. In Rome, this white lead paste was called cherusa, and it became one of the most popular cosmetics among the wealthy. Recipes survive in ancient texts describing how to prepare and apply it. Women smoothed it over their faces, necks, and arms, layering it until their skin gleamed. Sometimes it was mixed with chalk or ground oyster shells to soften the effect, but the lead remained dominant. A noble woman might reapply cherusa daily, unknowingly feeding herself a steady dose of toxin. Modern analysis of Roman skeletal remains has revealed high levels of lead, silent proof of a fashion trend turned fatal. But lead was not the only danger. Mercury, another heavy metal, was also used in the pursuit of fairness. In both Rome and later medieval Europe, cinnabar, a mercury ore, was ground into powders that served as both whiteners and rouges. Women dabbed it on their cheeks to create a pale base with a flush of color. Mercury, however, is one of the most dangerous substances known to humanity. Absorbed through the skin, it attacks the nervous system, causing tremors, hallucinations, and death. To imagine a Roman matron reclining at a feast, her cheeks glowing with cinnabar, is to imagine a woman slowly poisoning herself for the sake of admiration. The obsession with pale skin was not limited to the Mediterranean. In China and Japan, fairness became an equally powerful ideal. Ancient Chinese poetry praised women with skin like snow, comparing whiteness to purity and elegance. To achieve this, women used rice powders, pearl dust, and sometimes mixtures that contained toxic metals. In Japan, oshiroi, a white powder often containing lead, was applied thickly to the face by geishas and court ladies alike. The smooth, porcelain-like result was mesmerizing, but the poisons beneath were inescapable. The symbolism of fairness ran deeper than vanity. It carried social meaning. Pale skin meant freedom from labor, a life of leisure that only wealth could provide. It suggested fragility, delicacy, and refinement, traits prized in women especially. A pale woman was imagined as untouched by the harshness of the world, her beauty preserved by privilege. To darken was to descend, to risk being mistaken for a peasant or slave. Thus, fairness became not just beauty but identity, enforced by society and embraced even at great personal cost. The daily rituals of maintaining fairness were demanding. Women shielded themselves from the sun with parasols and veils. They bathed their faces in milk, believing it softened and lightened the skin. They applied mixtures of honey, vinegar, and chalk to whiten and smooth their complexion. And above all, they turned to powders and pastes that promised instant transformation. The sting of application, the faint metallic taste that sometimes crept into the mouth, the persistent headaches, these were dismissed as small prices for beauty. Pain was folded into ritual, normalized by repetition. The irony is sharp when we consider that fairness was often unhealthy in itself. A pale face devoid of sun lacked vitamin D, leading to weakness, bone pain, and illness. Many aristocrats suffered from rickets, their bodies weakened by the very seclusion that preserved their beauty. Yet this weakness was sometimes admired, interpreted as delicate refinement. A fragile, pale woman was seen as more beautiful than a robust, sun-kissed one. The ideal not only poisoned through cosmetics, but through lifestyle itself. Men, too, participated in this pursuit. Roman men sometimes applied powders to their faces, especially those in positions of power who wished to appear youthful and refined. In China, scholars and courtiers prided themselves on pale skin, contrasting themselves with laborers in the fields. The pursuit of fairness was universal, crossing gender as well as geography. Vanity was not confined, and poison spared no one. Archaeology reveals the remnants of this obsession. Cosmetic jars from Rome still contain traces of white lead. Chinese tombs preserve tiny boxes of pearl powder. Japanese scrolls describe the preparation of oshiroi, thick white paste applied with brushes. Each artifact speaks of lives shaped by an ideal that valued appearance over health. The bones of those who used these cosmetics often carry traces of lead and mercury, silent witnesses to the deadly cost of beauty. The social pressure was relentless. A woman with darkened skin risked mockery, exclusion, or loss of status. A man without pale refinement risked being mistaken for a common laborer. The need to conform was overwhelming, silencing any doubts about the dangers. Even when symptoms appeared, trembling hands, weakened bodies, decaying skin, the answer was not to abandon cosmetics, but to apply more, to cover the damage with fresh layers. The poison was not a deterrent. It was part of the process. The tragedy lies in the invisibility of the danger. Unlike a cut or burn, the effects of lead and mercury crept in slowly, almost imperceptibly. By the time they were undeniable, it was too late. The body was already weakened, the damage already done, and still the powders remained, beloved and trusted, passed down from mothers to daughters, teachers to students, generation to generation. The cycle endured, unbroken by reason or warning. Thus, the pale faces that shine in ancient poetry, art, and memory are not innocent. They are masks of poison, monuments to suffering hidden behind elegance. The marble-skinned maidens of Greece, the alabaster-cheeked matrons of Rome, the snow-skinned beauties of China and Japan, all carried within them the silent toll of toxic beauty. Their fairness was not natural. It was purchased with pain, purchased with health, purchased with life. To see them in imagination now is to see both sides. The dazzling glow under lamplight, the secret headaches in silence, the smoothness admired by crowds, the trembling hands in private, the elegance of fairness, the shadow of death beneath. The pursuit of pale skin was not a harmless dream. It was a deadly ritual, a poison painted daily onto the very canvas of the body. And so the story of pale faces in antiquity is the story of beauty turned against itself. The quest for fairness promised admiration, privilege, and identity. What it delivered was weakness, decay, and death. The pale mask was beautiful, yes, but it was also a shroud, covering not only the skin, but the truth that beauty in its darkest forms demands the highest price. From the first glance to the last, lips have always held a unique power over human perception. They frame our words, they signal our emotions, and they carry the promise of intimacy. In the ancient and medieval worlds, lips were among the most carefully emphasized features of beauty, painted in vivid colors that suggested vitality, sensuality, and allure. A woman with bright red lips could be seen as healthy, youthful, desirable, and confident. Yet behind the glow of rouge and the shimmer of vermilion lay some of the deadliest substances known to humankind. The pursuit of beauty through lip color was not simply harmless decoration. It was a practice steeped in poison. The origins of painted lips stretch far back into antiquity. Archaeologists have discovered traces of lip paints in Mesopotamian tombs, where women ground semi-precious stones into powder and mixed them with oils to create shimmering tints. In Egypt, lips were colored with red ochre, a mineral pigment that provided a deep, earthy red. For Cleopatra, whose beauty was immortalized in legend, lip color was essential. Historical records suggest she used crushed carmine beetles to produce a striking crimson hue, mixed with beeswax and oils to form a paste. The effect must have been captivating. Crimson lips framed by darkly painted eyes, a face shimmering in lamplight. Yet even here, danger lurked. Some of these pigments contained trace amounts of mercury or lead, seeping slowly into the skin with every application. In Rome, lip color became an essential part of feminine display. Aristocratic women smeared their mouths with mixtures of red, lead, and cinnabar, a mercury sulfide ore. These substances produced a bright, dazzling red that shimmered in the light of the forum or the glow of banquet lamps. The sight of such lips conveyed vitality and health, but both lead and mercury were catastrophic poisons. Lead weakened the nervous system, caused tremors and decay, and eventually disfigured the very face it adorned. Mercury attacked the brain, bringing madness, hallucinations, and death. Roman women, admired for their glowing lips, were often suffering silently from the poisons they carried on their skin. The irony is cruel. The lips that smiled seductively, whispered in intimacy, or commanded respect were also the lips of a body being slowly destroyed. Beyond Rome, lip paints flourished in other cultures as well. In India, red lips were considered a sign of sensuality and refinement. Women used betel nut mixtures which stained the lips a deep red when chewed, leaving a permanent tint. The betel quid, a blend of areca nut, lime, and other ingredients, became a cultural staple, passed between lovers, offered in ceremonies, and used for daily beauty. Yet the betel nut is carcinogenic, its habitual use linked to oral cancers and decay. Lovers may have exchanged crimson smiles, but they also exchanged sickness. In China, lips were painted with mixtures of cinnabar, plant dyes, and waxes. Court ladies applied these paints meticulously, creating small, delicate shapes, sometimes painting only the center of the lips for a subtle bloom of color. Poems describe these lips as blossoms, delicate and inviting. But cinnabar, again, brought mercury into the bloodstream. Women in the imperial courts suffered tremors, weakness, and decline, even as their lips glowed with beauty. The romantic verses praising their allure concealed a darker truth. Beauty was literally eating them alive from within. Japan, too, developed its own traditions. Geishas and courtesans used a mixture called bani, derived from safflower petals, to tint their lips. Though less toxic than cinnabar or lead, bani often contained additives that made it harmful. Over time, imported recipes included vermilion pigments, once again introducing mercury into the mix. The bright scarlet lips of a geisha, glowing against her porcelain white skin, symbolized refinement and elegance. Yet the elegance was fragile, carried on substances that shortened life. The symbolism of red lips was profound across cultures. Red was the color of life, of blood, of passion. Painted lips suggested vitality, fertility, and seduction. They could attract lovers, command attention, or intimidate rivals. In Rome, a woman with crimson lips was seen as confident and powerful. In China, delicately painted lips reflected refinement and poise. To leave lips uncolored was often to risk appearing plain or unremarkable. Social pressure reinforced the practice, binding women to routines that harmed them invisibly. The ritual of painting lips was intimate, almost sacred. In Rome, women sat with mirrors of polished bronze or silver, carefully applying cinnabar paste with slender brushes. In China, ladies of the court pressed safflower-stained paper against their mouths, watching the bloom of red spread across their lips. In Japan, geishas painted their lips in ritual preparation, transforming themselves into living works of art. Each stroke was a promise of beauty, each shimmer a mask of poison. The daily repetition created not only allure but dependence, as women could not appear in public without their painted lips. The dangers of these practices were manifold. Lead-based rouges corroded the skin, leaving sores and decay. Mercury-based paints caused tremors, hallucinations, and death. Even natural ingredients carried risks. Betel nut stained teeth black and rotted them away. Safflower pigments caused allergies and rashes. The lips, delicate and sensitive, absorbed these substances readily, delivering toxins into the bloodstream with terrifying efficiency. The very feature meant to embody vitality was slowly drained of it. And yet the cultural weight of painted lips was so powerful that danger was ignored. A woman without painted lips might be judged as careless, unattractive, or unworthy. Her social standing could suffer, her desirability questioned. For courtesans and performers, lip paint was not optional but essential, the difference between success and obscurity. The poisons of rouge were endured as part of the profession, a price paid silently for beauty and survival. Archaeological evidence preserves this story. Small jars and containers of cinnabar rouge have been found in Roman graves. Chinese tombs contain delicate boxes of lip paint, sometimes still stained red with residue. Japanese texts describe the careful preparation of bani, emphasizing its ritual importance. Even skeletal remains reveal the truth. High levels of lead and mercury in the bones of women who lived lives adorned with painted lips. The beauty they carried in life is gone, but the poison remains in their very bones. The paradox of painted lips is haunting. They were symbols of life, yet carried death. They were signals of vitality, yet drained health. They were instruments of seduction, yet tools of decay. The lips that smiled, whispered, and kissed were also lips of poison, red not only with paint, but with suffering. The allure of red was undeniable, irresistible, and inescapably dangerous. To imagine the ancient banquet hall, with Roman matrons laughing, their lips glowing crimson under lamplight, or the Chinese court, where ladies pressed safflower pigments to their mouths before poetry recitals, is to see a world where beauty and poison were one and the same. The painted lips of antiquity dazzled those who saw them, but behind the glow lay tragedy. And so the story of rouge and vermilion is not one of harmless color. It is a story of danger wrapped in seduction, of poison disguised as passion. The lips that spoke love, that sang poetry, that smiled across crowded rooms, carried within them the seeds of destruction. In their redness we see both beauty and death, entwined in a kiss that lingers across centuries. Hair has always been one of humanity's most potent symbols of identity and beauty. Flowing tresses, gleaming curls, and shining locks carried meaning far beyond appearance. They were signs of status, markers of culture, and signals of vitality. In the ancient world, hair was not just a feature of the body, but a canvas upon which ideals of beauty, fashion, and power were painted. And as with skin and lips, the pursuit of beautiful hair drove people to embrace treatments, dyes, and rituals that were not only harsh but often deadly. The desire for hair of gold, of ebony, of radiant brilliance led to practices that poisoned bodies, burned scalps, and destroyed health, all in the name of beauty. The roots of hair dye stretch deep into history. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, hair color carried symbolic significance. Egyptians darkened their hair with henna, a natural dye that left it a deep reddish brown. This practice was widespread and relatively safe, but not all dyes were so harmless. As societies evolved, so did the obsession with transformation. The Greeks admired blonde hair, associating golden locks with youth, beauty, and even divinity. In Homer's epics, heroes and goddesses alike were described as having hair like shining gold. This literary and cultural ideal translated into real life, where women and men alike sought ways to lighten their dark Mediterranean hair into shades of gold. To achieve this transformation, they turned to dangerous recipes. Mixtures of ashes, vinegar, and plant extracts were rubbed into the scalp. Then hair was exposed to the sun for hours. Some concoctions used quicklime, a caustic substance that burned the skin and corroded hair. The promise was alluring, a crown of golden locks shimmering in the sunlight, but the pain was intense. Scalp burns, hair loss, and chronic skin irritation were common, and the long-term exposure to caustic chemicals left lasting scars. Still, the desire for blonde hair was irresistible. Rome inherited and magnified this obsession. Roman poets often praised women with blonde hair, comparing them to goddesses and heroines. Blonde slaves, particularly from northern Europe, were prized, and their hair was often harvested to create wigs for Roman noblewomen. These wigs became symbols of wealth and luxury, but for those who sought to dye their own hair, the methods were brutal. Recipes recorded by Roman writers included mixtures of goat fat and beechwood ashes, rubbed vigorously into hair, and left under the hot sun. Some used saffron for a golden tint, though its cost made it accessible only to the wealthy. Others experimented with lead-based dyes, believing they would produce lasting color. The results varied. Some achieved brightness, others only destroyed their hair and poisoned their bodies. The dangers of these dyes cannot be overstated. Lead compounds used to darken or lighten hair seeped into the scalp, entering the bloodstream and weakening the body. Quicklime and lye burned the skin, leaving sores and scars. Mercury, sometimes included in hair treatments for added sheen, poisoned the nervous system. The pursuit of beauty left women with bald patches, chronic pain, and premature aging, ironically destroying the very feature they sought to enhance. Yet the cultural pressure was immense. A noblewoman with dull or graying hair risked being seen as old, unattractive, or unworthy. The price of beauty, however steep, was deemed necessary. The obsession with blonde hair spread beyond Rome. In medieval Europe, fairness and golden hair were linked to ideals of purity, nobility, and virtue. Blonde maidens filled poetry and song, their shining hair celebrated as the height of beauty. Women darkened their hair with soot or tried to bleach it with caustic substances, enduring pain and damage for the sake of fashion. In Renaissance Italy, Venetian women were famous for their pursuit of golden hair. They sat on rooftops under the blazing sun, their hair coated with concoctions of saffron, alum, and urine, all designed to lighten their locks. Their wide-brimmed hats shielded their faces, but left their hair exposed, creating a striking spectacle of devotion to beauty. The cost was hair weakened, brittle, and often lost, but the allure of gold was too powerful to resist. For men, hair was no less important. Roman men darkened their hair with lead combs dipped in vinegar, a method that turned hair black over time. These lead combs released small amounts of lead acetate, gradually dyeing the hair but also poisoning the scalp. The darkened look was fashionable, masking gray hairs and restoring a youthful appearance. Yet it carried the same silent danger as all lead-based cosmetics. Men seeking virility and vigor were slowly weakened by the very tools meant to preserve. Their image. The rituals of hair care extended beyond dyes. Oils, perfumes, and powders were applied daily to keep hair gleaming and fragrant. Many of these contained harmful substances from rancid fats to metallic salts. Hairstyles themselves could be destructive. Elaborate braids and tight bindings damaged hair roots, while heavy wigs strained the scalp. Women slept sitting upright to preserve their towering hair arrangements, sacrificing comfort and health for beauty. Infections spread easily in the warm, oiled environments created by these hairstyles, leading to lice infestations and skin diseases. The symbolism of hair, however, was too powerful to ignore. Long, flowing locks represented youth and vitality. Golden hair symbolized divinity and purity. Black, glossy hair suggested mystery and allure. To conform to these ideals was to secure admiration, status, and sometimes even survival. Courtesans, queens, and noblewomen all used their hair as weapons of beauty, tools of seduction, and signs of identity. For men, hair was equally tied to dignity and power. Baldness was mocked, grayness despised, and dyes embraced as solutions. However toxic they might be, archaeological evidence confirms the prevalence of these practices. Roman tombs contain combs still stained with residue from dyes, while ancient texts preserve recipes for hair treatments. Skeletal remains show signs of lead poisoning consistent with the use of lead-based dyes and combs. In Venice, records describe the elaborate rooftop rituals of women bleaching their hair in the sun, their golden locks becoming symbols of the city's beauty. The pursuit of hair perfection left behind not only poems and portraits, but also the scars of poison and pain etched into history. The irony is sharp. Hair, so often celebrated as the crown of beauty, became a source of suffering. In seeking to make it shine brighter, last longer, or glow with unnatural color, people destroyed it, poisoned themselves, and shortened their lives. The golden hair of poems was, in reality, brittle, damaged, and often falling away. The blackened locks of Roman men carried within them the seeds of decay. The beauty admired in art was purchased with suffering in life. To imagine a Roman matron, her hair gleaming blonde from hours under the sun with toxic pastes, or a Venetian noblewoman, her golden locks admired at a feast while her scalp burned beneath, is to see the dark side of hair's allure. The shining crowns of history were not natural gifts, but carefully constructed illusions, born of poison, pain, and sacrifice. And so the story of ancient and medieval hair is a story of paradox. Hair was celebrated as life itself, yet its beauty was maintained with tools of death. The golden locks sung by poets were achieved through caustic burns. The darkened tresses of noblemen were painted with poison. Beauty was achieved, but at a cost hidden beneath admiration. The hair that shone like gold, that framed faces of marble whiteness, that fell in curls of seduction, carried with it the silent weight of decay. Scent has always been one of the most mysterious elements of human beauty. Unlike painted skin or gleaming hair, perfume was invisible, yet its power was undeniable. A fragrance could entrance a lover, intimidate a rival, or mark one's presence long after departure. In ancient and medieval societies, perfume was far more than decoration. It was identity, charm, and even magic. But just like the cosmetics painted on the skin, perfumes and powders often carried hidden dangers. The very substances that made people smell divine could just as easily destroy their health. What lingered in the air as sweetness often lingered in the body as poison. The history of perfume begins in the earliest civilizations. In Mesopotamia, perfumers were artisans of high status, crafting oils and resins into aromatic blends. These early perfumes were used not only for allure but for ritual, sealing the link between fragrance and power. In Egypt, perfume was essential to both men and women. Oils infused with myrrh, frankincense, and lotus were smeared on skin and hair, leaving the body fragrant under the blazing sun. Cleopatra herself was said to have sailed to meet Mark Antony on a ship whose sails were drenched in perfume, the air around her filled with intoxicating scents. To wear fragrance was to project influence, and yet even here danger lurked. Many perfumes were prepared with carriers like animal fats or resins that went rancid quickly, leading to skin infections. Some recipes also used lead and mercury salts to stabilize pigments in scented powders. Seeding poison into the pores, Rome embraced perfume with an intensity bordering on obsession. Roman markets sold hundreds of varieties: rose, saffron, cinnamon, and exotic blends imported from Arabia and India. Roman writers complained that the streets reeked of perfume, with wealthy citizens bathing daily in oils, dusting their bodies with scented powders, and even perfuming their clothes. Women painted their faces with aromatic creams that doubled as cosmetics. The most dangerous of these contained not only flowers and herbs, but ground minerals laced with lead. Powders infused with scent were often sprinkled directly onto the hair and skin, leaving a glittering, fragrant layer. But each application carried trace poisons, absorbed silently, day after day. A woman leaving her home with glowing cheeks and fragrant hair might smell divine, but her blood was thick with toxins. The link between perfume and seduction was irresistible. Roman satirists mocked men who drenched themselves in scent, but they also admitted its effectiveness. Perfume carried erotic connotations, a signal of intimacy and availability. Lovers exchanged scented sachets as tokens of desire. Courtesans relied on fragrance as much as cosmetics, coating themselves in oils that made their presence unforgettable. But while fragrance lingered in memory, the chemicals lingered in the body. Essential oils, distilled crudely with heat and metals, often contained impurities that irritated the skin or entered the bloodstream. The repeated exposure wore down the body slowly, turning allure into decay. In China, fragrance was equally tied to refinement. Aristocrats burned incense and carried scented pouches to ward off bad smells and attract admiration. Women dusted themselves with perfumed powders, some of which contained arsenic and mercury. The powders created a pale, smooth sheen on the skin, masking blemishes and adding a delicate scent. But as with Roman Cherusa, the poisons beneath caused damage over time. Arsenic corroded the skin, mercury weakened the body, and yet the powders remained popular. To smell of nothing was to appear common. To smell of roses or sandalwood was to appear refined. Social expectations silenced any whispers of danger. Japan developed its own traditions, where fragrance became an art form. The practice of kondo, the way of incense, elevated scent to ritual. Nobles competed to identify subtle differences. In incense blends, while women perfumed their hair and clothes with scented smoke. Cosmetic powders, too, were often fragranced, combining beauty and aroma in one. Some included crushed shells, rice flour, and plant extracts. Others, however, were laced with metallic salts for added brilliance, carrying toxins beneath the perfume. A geisha's delicate fragrance, clinging to her skin and hair, was as carefully crafted as her painted face, and just as dangerous in its hidden cost. Perfume was not only worn, but consumed. In both Rome and medieval Europe, small amounts of scented concoctions were sometimes ingested as medicines or aphrodisiacs. Lovers drank spiced wines laced with musk, ambergris, or saffron, believing the fragrance would permeate their bodies and make them irresistible. But these drinks often contained dangerous additives, ground minerals, resins, or animal products that poisoned the gut. A sip meant to spark passion could instead spark illness. The line between perfume and poison blurred easily. When fragrance was taken inside the body, the allure of fragrance was inseparable from class. Perfume was expensive, imported across deserts and seas, traded as dearly as gold. To wear it was to display wealth and refinement. The poor might smell of sweat and earth, but the rich smelled of roses and spice. The contrast reinforced social divisions. Scent itself became a symbol of power. Yet this symbol carried hidden risks. The wealthier a person, the more perfumes and powders they used, and thus the greater their exposure to toxins. In seeking to distinguish themselves from the poor, the rich often hastened their own decline. The rituals of scent were deeply ingrained. Roman women anointed themselves daily, layering oils and powders with care. Medieval noble women kept scented pomanders, metal balls filled with fragrant herbs, at their waists, inhaling them regularly. Chinese courtiers bathed in perfumed water, their skin absorbing not only fragrance but also the chemicals within. Lovers exchanged scented gloves, handkerchiefs, and fans, ensuring that the smell of desire lingered wherever they went. Every gesture carried fragrance, every presence left a trail. To abstain from perfume was unthinkable. To embrace it was. To embrace poison in disguise. The irony lies in the double nature of scent. Perfume was meant to ward off foul odors, yet its preparation often caused infections and sickness. Powders were meant to smooth and refresh the skin, yet they corroded it silently. Fragrance promised vitality, but it delivered decay. A noble woman who perfumed her hair with oils might glow in the candlelight, but beneath the sheen her scalp burned, her blood weakened, her health drained away. The scent admired by others was the perfume of death in slow motion. Archaeology preserves these stories in small, delicate vessels. Roman glass bottles still glimmer with traces of oils long evaporated. Chinese lacquer boxes contain powdered remains of perfumed arsenic. Japanese incense burners are found in aristocratic graves, testifying to lives lived amid fragrance. Each artifact whispers of allure and danger entwined. The scent is gone, but the poison lingers in the historical record, reminding us of the hidden costs of beauty. To imagine the banquet halls of Rome, thick with perfume, the air heavy with roses and spices, or the Chinese court where delicate powders scented courtyards and hair, or the Japanese geisha, her presence marked by both painted lips and fragrant aura, as to see a world where beauty was not only seen but smelled, where fragrance was as crucial as color, and where danger hung invisibly in the air. Among all the rituals of beauty in human history, few are as haunting and painful as the practice of foot binding in China. For nearly 1,000 years, the binding of young girls' feet was celebrated as the pinnacle of feminine elegance, a symbol of refinement, desirability, and obedience. The so-called lotus foot, tiny, arched, and impossibly small, was praised in poetry, painted in art, and fetishized by generations of men. Yet beneath the silken shoes and delicate steps lay a story of unimaginable suffering. To achieve this ideal, countless women endured a lifetime of pain, disfigurement, and disability. The beauty that men admired was built on broken bones, rotting flesh, and a lifetime of scars. The origins of foot binding are traced to the Song dynasty around the 10th century. Legend tells of a court dancer named Yao Niang who bound her feet to create a graceful lotus-like shape that captivated the emperor. Her delicate, swaying movements, enhanced by her tiny bound feet, set a trend that spread through the elite courts of China. Over time, the practice became not only fashionable but necessary. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, bound feet were a prerequisite for marriage among the upper classes. A girl with natural, unbound feet was considered coarse, unfeminine, and undesirable. The cruel irony was that while bound feet were praised as graceful, they were in fact the result of intense suffering inflicted on girls from the youngest ages. The process of foot binding began early, usually when a girl was between 4 and 7 years old, before her bones fully hardened. Mothers or female relatives carried out the ritual, though professional foot binders also existed. The procedure was simple in description but excruciating in reality. First, the toenails were cut short to prevent infection. Then the toes, except for the big toe, were bent sharply downward, pressed into the sole of the foot. Long bandages, soaked in water or herbs, were tightly wound around the foot, forcing the toes under and the arch upward. Each day, the bandages were tightened further, bending the foot into an ever more unnatural shape. The goal was to reduce the foot to about 3 inches in length, the so-called golden lotus. The pain was unbearable. Bones snapped, joints dislocated, and flesh tore under the pressure. Girls screamed through the process, sometimes fainting or falling ill. Infections were common as toenails grew into flesh or sores festered beneath the bindings. Gangrene often set in, leading to the loss of toes or even death. And yet, despite the agony, the ritual was celebrated as a mark of love and care. A mother who bound her daughter's feet believed she was securing her future, ensuring she would be married into wealth and stability. The suffering was framed as an investment in survival. Once bound, the feet required constant maintenance. The bindings had to be unwound, washed, and rewound regularly, sometimes daily, sometimes less often depending on the family's diligence. Each time, the bandages were pulled tighter, ensuring the bones remained broken and the arch continued to rise. Shoes were specially made to fit these tiny arched feet, often embroidered with silk and decorated with patterns of flowers or butterflies. On the surface, the shoes were works of art, symbols of delicacy and grace. Inside, however, they concealed twisted, crushed feet that could barely support the body. For the girls who underwent the ritual, the consequences were lifelong. Walking was painful, awkward, and limited. Women with bound feet often hobbled, swayed, or required support. They were unable to run, climb, or labor easily, which ironically enhanced their desirability among men of the elite. A woman with bound feet was seen as delicate, dependent, and confined to the domestic sphere, exactly the qualities patriarchal society valued. The eroticism of bound feet was powerful as well. Men wrote poetry describing the allure of women's tiny steps, the shape of the lotus foot hidden within silk slippers, and even the scent of bound feet, which developed distinct odors from constant binding and lack of ventilation. What women endured as pain, men reimagined as beauty. The cruelty of this practice cannot be overstated. Girls endured infections that ate away at their bones. Some lost toes entirely, leaving behind mangled stumps. The constant pressure warped the spine and hips as women adjusted their gait to balance on their crushed feet. Elderly women with bound feet often suffered severe arthritis, immobility, and isolation. Yet they defended the practice as necessary, passing it down to the next generation. To reject foot binding was to risk social ruin, to doom one's daughters to a life without marriage prospects. The pressure to conform was immense, and so the cycle continued for centuries. Archaeological and historical evidence paints a vivid picture of this torment. Shoes from the Qing dynasty measure only 3 to 4 inches, embroidered in exquisite detail. Skeletons reveal warped bones, curled toes, and deformed arches. Written accounts describe the daily agony of women tightening their bindings, even into old age. Yet the practice persisted, praised in poetry, and upheld as tradition. Even reformers who tried to end it faced resistance. Families believed bound feet were essential to survival in a competitive, hierarchical society. It was not until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that foot binding began to decline, under pressure from both internal reformers and Western influence. Intellectuals criticized the practice as barbaric and harmful, while political leaders sought to modernize China. Campaigns were launched urging families to stop binding their daughters' feet. Slowly, the practice waned, though remnants of it persisted well into the 20th century, particularly in rural areas. Women who had endured it lived the rest of their lives with its scars, both physical and emotional. Some recalled the practice with pride, believing it had secured them good marriages. Others spoke of it with bitterness, remembering the endless pain. The story of foot binding is one of extremes: beauty and pain, pride and suffering, tradition and cruelty. It reveals how cultural ideals can transform natural features into symbols of status, even at immense human cost. The lotus foot, celebrated in art and poetry, was in reality a mark of violence inflicted on children, perpetuated across generations. The bound foot was not simply a cosmetic choice. It was a system of control, confining women to dependence, robbing them of mobility and ensuring their obedience. To imagine a young girl, her cries muffled as her mother wound the bandages tighter. To picture her later in life, hobbling on broken feet while men praised her grace. To see her embroidered slippers displayed as treasures while her flesh rotted within them, is to confront the brutal reality behind the beauty. The bound foot was a contradiction made flesh, celebrated as delicate but achieved through violence, praised as elegant but born of pain. And so the story of foot binding belongs among the darkest chapters of beauty's history. It reminds us that ideals of beauty are not always natural or harmless. They are constructed and forced, and sometimes paid for with blood. The lotus foot may have been admired in poetry and song, but it was built on broken bones. The silken slippers of history conceal not elegance but agony, the weight of centuries of suffering endured in the name of beauty. For centuries, pale skin was the most prized mark of beauty in Europe. A white, porcelain-like face was not just a matter of fashion. It was a social symbol, a declaration of wealth, purity, and nobility. To be pale meant that you did not labor under the sun like peasants. It meant refinement, delicacy, and distance from the grit of the earth. Across medieval courts, through the Renaissance, and into the early modern period, pale skin became the ultimate canvas upon which beauty was painted. But achieving this look required more than staying indoors. It demanded cosmetics powders and paints, many of them crafted from substances that were slow poisons. To wear the mask of lead was to court death every day, even as admirers praised one's radiant beauty. The obsession with whiteness stretched far back. In the Middle Ages, noble women avoided the sun and covered themselves in veils and hats. But soon powders came into play. Chalk, flour, and ground alabaster were early tools, dusted across the face to create a pale sheen. These left the skin dry and unnatural, flaking off easily. So recipes grew bolder. By the Renaissance, women across Europe had embraced ceruse, a cosmetic blend of vinegar and white lead. This deadly mixture created a smooth, opaque whiteness that clung to the skin, hiding blemishes, smoothing imperfections, and giving the face the luminous glow of polished marble. Portraits of queens and noblewomen show this pallor, frozen in paint, masking the truth of what lay beneath. Lead-based powders were insidious. Applied daily, they seeped into pores, entering the bloodstream and accumulating in the body. At first, the effects were subtle, a headache, fatigue, or mild irritation of the skin. But with time, the symptoms grew impossible to ignore. Skin blackened or turned gray beneath the paint, eruptions and sores appeared, and hair fell out in clumps. Teeth loosened, gums bled, and the face beneath the mask grew gaunt and sickly. Yet the very damage caused by the powder only deepened dependence on it. Women used even more ceruse to cover the blemishes and sores, layering poison upon poison, hiding the decay with an ever thicker mask. The cycle was vicious and unrelenting. One of the most famous victims of this obsession was Elizabeth I of England. Her pale face, immortalized in countless portraits, became a symbol of her regal image. Known as the Mask of Youth, her whiteness hid scars left by smallpox. But the price was immense. The lead in her cosmetics eroded her skin, blackened her teeth, and poisoned her body. Yet she could not abandon the powder. Her image depended on it. Even as she aged and weakened, she continued to paint her face white, concealing her suffering. Behind the very substance that caused it, she was not alone. Noble women across Europe did the same, driven by the unrelenting demand for pallor. Perfumed powders only heightened the danger. To mask the metallic odor of ceruse, women mixed in herbs, flowers, and oils, creating fragrant blends. These were dusted not only on the face, but on the neck, chest, and hands. The result was dazzling, a vision of pale, smooth beauty scented with roses or violets. But each application increased exposure, deepening the poisoning within. The contrast between appearance and reality was stark. Women admired for their beauty were often exhausted, sickly, and in pain. Behind the mask, they coughed blood, suffered trembling hands, and endured rotting teeth. Men, too, were not immune. Courtiers and aristocrats often powdered their faces, especially in France. During the reign of Louis XIV, elaborate wigs and powdered faces became the fashion of the court. Both men and women dusted themselves daily, covering imperfections and projecting refinement. But beneath the powder, the same poison worked. Men who strutted proudly in gleaming coats and perfumed wigs were slowly withering, their vitality drained. By lead and mercury, the court sparkled with light and beauty, but it was a light that burned with hidden sickness. The dangers were known, though often dismissed. Physicians warned of the poisonous effects of lead, noting its impact on the skin and body. Some writers mocked women for painting their faces, calling them hypocrites or accusing them of hiding their true selves. But the social demand for whiteness was stronger than reason. To appear without powder was to risk being called coarse or unfashionable. Women who abandoned the mask risked ridicule or exclusion from courtly life. For many, the choice was between slow poisoning and social ruin. Most chose poison. The rituals of applying powder were elaborate. Women sat before mirrors as servants ground powders and mixed pastes. Brushes and cloths were used to layer the ceruse evenly, covering the face with careful strokes. Rouge was added to the cheeks, creating a contrast of red against white. The lips were painted bright, the eyes darkened, the entire face transformed into a canvas of idealized beauty. When complete, the transformation was striking. The woman in the mirror looked luminous, flawless, ethereal. But beneath the powder, the skin burned, the blood thickened with lead, the body slowly collapsed. The irony was cruel. The powders meant to preserve youth hastened aging. The mask of white cracked, revealing sores and decay beneath. The cosmetics meant to project vitality delivered death. Women spent fortunes on perfumes, powders, and rouges, not realizing that their wealth was buying poison disguised as beauty. Portraits immortalized them as visions of elegance, but their bodies told a darker story. Behind every painted queen and powdered courtier lay a tale of sickness hidden under silk and lace dot by the 18th century. The dangers of lead were better understood, and alternatives were sought. Rice powder became popular, a safer if less effective substitute. Some used starches or natural chalk, but the lure of ceruse persisted, especially among those desperate to hide blemishes or scars. Even as women collapsed from illness, the demand for whiteness kept the practice alive. It was not until the 19th century, with growing medical awareness and changing fashions, that the mask of lead finally began to fade. Pale skin remained prized, but sunlight, healthier diets, and safer cosmetics offered new paths to achieve it. Legacy of ceruse is written in history's portraits and poems. The pale faces of queens, noblewomen, and courtiers gaze out from paintings, admired for their elegance, their whiteness, their perfection. Yet behind the paint lies the truth. Their beauty was a mask, crafted with poison, maintained with suffering, and worn until death. The mask of lead is one of history's cruelest ironies, a cosmetic that promised eternal youth but delivered decay. To imagine a Renaissance noblewoman sitting by candlelight as her maid paints her face white. To picture Her entering a ball, her pallor admired by all. To see her later in her chamber, vomiting blood, her teeth blackened, her skin raw beneath the powder, is to understand the true cost of beauty in this age. The mask of lead was not merely makeup. It was a sentence one accepted willingly, in exchange for admiration. And so the story of white skin and deadly powders belongs firmly in the dark side of ancient beauty. The pursuit of pallor, praised in art and song, was achieved through poison. The whiteness admired by lovers and poets was the sheen of death itself, painted daily onto living flesh. Behind every flawless face of history lies the same haunting truth. Beauty was a mask, and the mask was made of lead. For much of European history, beauty was measured not only by the face, but by the shape of the body. The silhouette of a woman was a declaration of status, refinement, and desirability. And no garment shaped the body more dramatically than the corset. For centuries, corsets cinched waists, lifted busts, and sculpted figures into the narrow, hourglass form that society idealized. Portraits of noble women and photographs of 19th century ladies show impossibly small waists, dresses that flowed outward like inverted bells, and postures that projected elegance and control. Yet beneath the silk and lace was an instrument of restriction, one that altered breathing, deformed bones, and sometimes even took lives. The corset was both a fashion icon and a silent killer. The origins of the corset can be traced back to the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. Early versions, often called stays, were stiffened bodices designed to flatten the torso and provide structure to the gown. Over time, the goal shifted from flattening to shaping. By the 16th century, stays were reinforced with whalebone, wood, or even metal, pulling the waist inward while pushing the bust upward. The result was a striking figure, narrow, upright, controlled. To wear stays was to embody order, discipline, and refinement. Queens like Catherine de' Medici were rumored to enforce their use at court, cementing the corset as a symbol of high society. But the corset of the Renaissance was only the beginning. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the garment had evolved into an instrument of extreme body modification. The Victorian corset, laced tightly at the back, created the coveted hourglass silhouette. Waists of 18 inches or less were celebrated as the pinnacle of beauty. Women competed to achieve the smallest possible waist, sometimes beginning the practice in childhood so that the body could be trained into submission. Photographs and surviving garments reveal just how extreme the fashion became, with corsets that seem impossibly narrow, designed to squeeze the torso into unnatural proportions. The effects on the body were devastating. Laced tightly, the corset compressed the ribs, pushing them inward and downward. Internal organs were displaced, stomachs compressed, and lungs restricted. Women found it difficult to breathe, often fainting at balls or gatherings, a phenomenon romanticized as delicate weakness, but in truth the direct result of suffocation. Doctors of the era warned of tight lacing, noting its impact on digestion, circulation, and reproductive health. Yet these warnings were often ignored. The beauty of the silhouette outweighed the risks. A woman who fainted in her corset was not seen as unhealthy, but as refined. Her fragility was part of her allure. Beyond fainting, the corset caused long-term damage. X-rays of women who wore corsets for decades reveal warped rib cages, organs displaced permanently, and spines bent unnaturally. Some suffered prolapsed organs or collapsed lungs. Childbirth became more difficult for women whose bodies had been compressed for years. And yet, despite the suffering, corsets remained mandatory for any woman wishing to move in polite society. To appear without one was considered indecent, almost scandalous. The corset was not simply a fashion item. It was a cage of social expectation. Men, too, were occasionally drawn into the corset's embrace. Aristocrats and dandies of the 18th and 19th centuries sometimes wore corsets to achieve a slim figure beneath their coats. Soldiers and horsemen used them for posture and support, but it was women who bore the brunt of the cultural obsession. Entire wardrobes were designed around the corset's shape. Dresses flared outward into vast skirts, emphasizing the narrow waist, while busts were elevated high, creating dramatic contrasts. To abandon the corset was to abandon fashion itself. Allure of the corset was tied deeply to eroticism. The narrow waist, the lifted bust, the swaying gait, all were fetishized by men and reinforced by art, literature, and culture. A tightly laced woman was both an object of admiration and desire, her very fragility seen as seductive. Lovers spoke of waists that could be spanned with two hands, of silhouettes that defied nature. But what was admired outwardly was inwardly destructive. The beauty was achieved by crushing bone and flesh into submission, by sacrificing comfort and health for the approval of others. The daily ritual of corsetry was itself an ordeal. Women rose each morning to be laced into their garments, often by servants or family members. The laces were pulled tight, sometimes so tight that women gasped for breath, clinging to furniture for support. Throughout the day, the corset dictated posture and movement. Sitting required perfect uprightness. Bending was nearly impossible. Eating was restricted, as the stomach had little room to expand. Yet women adapted, internalizing the restrictions until they seemed natural. The corset was not merely worn, it was endured. Criticism of the corset existed throughout its history. Physicians published warnings, reformers railed against its dangers, and women's rights advocates denounced it as a symbol of oppression. In the 19th century, dress reform movements sought looser clothing, promoting health over fashion. Yet these movements were slow to take hold. Society's demand for the hourglass figure was too strong. Even women who understood the risks often felt powerless to resist, trapped by expectations of beauty and respectability. The corset was not just fabric and bone. It was a social contract taught by the late 19th and early 20th centuries. However, change was inevitable. The rise of women's independence, coupled with new fashions and health concerns, began to loosen the corset's grip. Designers experimented with alternative garments like the brassiere, which offered support without extreme compression. Sports and physical activity became more acceptable for women, requiring looser clothing. The First World War accelerated the shift, as women took on new roles in factories and offices, abandoning restrictive garments out of necessity. By the 1920s, the corset had largely fallen out of fashion, replaced by looser, more natural silhouettes. Yet the shadow of the corset lingers. Modern shapewear, waist trainers, and body sculpting garments echo its legacy, promising slimmer figures and smoother lines. Social media has revived the image of the cinched waist, sparking debates about body modification and beauty standards. The corset's history reminds us that the pursuit of the perfect body has always carried costs. Often hidden beneath fabric and lace dot, to picture a Victorian ballroom is to see rows of women, their waists impossibly small, their gowns shimmering. In candlelight, admirers marvel at their elegance, unaware or unwilling to admit that behind the glamour are crushed ribs, strained lungs, and women teetering on the edge of collapse. To imagine the daily tightening of laces, the silent endurance of pain, the long nights spent gasping for breath, is to confront the darker truth behind the beauty. The corset was more than fashion. It was a symbol of control, discipline, and conformity, one that literally reshaped the female body to fit an artificial ideal. It promised elegance, but delivered suffering. It projected beauty, but concealed pain. It gave society the silhouette it demanded, while taking from women the comfort and health they deserved. And so, the story of the corset belongs firmly in the dark side of beauty's history. Beneath the silk and embroidery, beneath the admiration of poets and lovers, lay crushed bones and displaced organs. The hourglass figure, immortalized in art and memory, was forged in pain. The corset was both a crown and a cage, and women wore it for centuries, their beauty measured in inches, their suffering hidden beneath the mask of fashion. The story of beauty is not just about powders, perfumes, corsets, and wigs. It is about human desire, the relentless pursuit of admiration, status, and perfection. Across centuries, people have risked their comfort, their health, even their lives to embody the ideals their societies demanded. From the painted faces of ancient Egypt to the lead masks of Renaissance Europe, from the bound feet of China to the cinched waists of Victorian England, beauty has often been written in pain. And though fashions have changed, the legacy of these deadly practices still lingers, shaping how we think about appearance today. To look back at history is to see a haunting pattern. Beauty has rarely been harmless. Consider the women of the Renaissance, their faces painted with ceruse, lead poisoning creeping into their bloodstreams. They smiled in portraits, radiant with pallor, even as their bodies weakened beneath the mask. Or the Victorian ladies whose waists measured mere inches, their rib cages compressed, lungs gasping for breath, fainting in candlelit ballrooms while admirers praised their elegance. Or the nobles who strutted in powdered wigs, inhaling arsenic and mercury, scratching at lice beneath perfumed curls, all for the sake of fashion. In each case, the performance of beauty was a triumph of appearance over reality, of image over health. What drove people to such extremes? Part of the answer lies in status. Beauty was never just personal. It was social currency. Pale skin declared wealth because it proved one did not labor under the sun. A narrow waist symbolized refinement and self-control. A towering wig projected power, wealth, and authority. To abandon these symbols was to risk ridicule, exclusion, or obscurity. In societies obsessed with hierarchy and appearance, individuals often felt they had no choice. To be beautiful was to survive socially, even if it meant suffering privately. Another part of the answer lies in desire. Human beings have always longed to transcend the ordinary, to appear extraordinary. Beauty promised transformation, the chance to be admired, desired, even immortalized in art and memory. For that promise, many were willing to endure pain. The lead-based powder that ate away at skin also gave a luminous glow. The corset that crushed ribs also created a silhouette admired by poets and lovers. The towering wig that attracted lice also crowned one with elegance. The allure of beauty outweighed the warnings, and so generation after generation repeated the cycle, trading health for admiration. But history also reveals the cruelty hidden in beauty standards. These ideals were rarely chosen freely. Women, in particular, were bound by expectations enforced by culture, family, and society. A noble woman who refused to paint her face risked being mocked as unfashionable. A young bride who refused a corset risked being seen as coarse. A courtier without a wig might be dismissed as unworthy of high company. The tools of beauty were not just voluntary ornaments. They were obligations enforced by the silent but powerful rules of society. And so individuals endured pain not only for themselves but to meet the demands of others. This is the true dark side of beauty, not only that it caused suffering, but that it demanded it. The history of cosmetics and fashion is a history of control, of bodies shaped, painted, poisoned, and constrained to fit ideals. It is also a history of irony. The very tools meant to preserve youth hastened aging. The powders meant to brighten skin darkened it with disease. The corsets meant to project vitality left women fainting and weak. The wigs meant to crown nobles. With glory stank of rot and vermin. Beauty, so often celebrated as life, was too often entwined with decay. Yet for all the pain, people did not stop. Even as physicians warned of lead poisoning, women continued to powder their faces. Even as reformers denounced corsets, young girls were laced into them. Even as satirists mocked towering wigs, men and women wore them proudly. The cycle reveals something deeper. Beauty is not just about the body. It is about identity. To appear beautiful was to be recognized, to be valued, to be part of the story of one's age. To abandon beauty was to risk invisibility. And so the sacrifices continued, each generation layering its own mask of pain upon the past. What, then, does this legacy teach us today? Modern beauty standards may no longer require lead powder or whalebone corsets, but the echoes are undeniable. Cosmetic surgeries, extreme diets, chemical treatments, and body-shaping garments all carry risks. Social media amplifies the pressure, projecting perfected images that drive people to pursue impossible ideals. The technology has changed, but the underlying drive remains the same, to endure discomfort, even harm for the sake of beauty. History warns us that the costs are real, that beneath the glamorous images may lie pain and suffering as old as civilization itself. The persistence of this pattern forces us to ask difficult questions. Why do we continue to value beauty so highly, even when it brings harm? Why do societies enforce ideals that punish the body, that demand conformity over comfort? And perhaps most haunting of all, have we truly learned from the past, or are we repeating it in new disguises? The lead powders and corsets may be gone, but the spirit of their sacrifice lives on in the countless ways people still reshape themselves to fit expectations. Yet there is also hope in the legacy. History has shown that change is possible. The corset, once unbreakable, gave way to looser fashions, Lead powders eventually disappeared as awareness grew. Wigs lost their dominance, replaced by simpler styles. Reform movements, driven by those who dared to resist, reshaped beauty standards in healthier directions. If the past reveals suffering, it also reveals resilience. People have always questioned, mocked, and challenged the extremes of beauty. And through those challenges, society has slowly, painfully, moved forward. To imagine the end of this story, picture a gallery of portraits across the centuries. The painted queens, their faces masked in white. The noble ladies, their waists, and possibly narrow. The courtiers, their wigs towering above them. They gaze out at us, elegant and perfect, yet we now see what they could not admit. We see the powders eating away at their skin, the corsets crushing their lungs, the wigs crawling with lice. We see the suffering hidden behind the brushstrokes. And as we see it, we recognize a truth that echoes to this day. Beauty has always had a price. The dark side of ancient beauty is not just history. It is a mirror. It reflects the dangers of chasing perfection, the costs of social pressure, the fragility of appearance. It warns us that beneath every glamorous image may lie pain, and it invites us to ask, will we continue to repeat this pattern, or will we learn to value beauty without demanding suffering? The answer lies not in the past, but in the choices we make today. And so the story ends where it began, with a reminder that behind the glittering masks of history lies a shadow. The powders, corsets, and wigs have faded, but the lesson remains. Beauty can inspire, but it can also destroy. To remember this is to honor those who suffered in silence, and perhaps to build a future where beauty is no longer bound to pain.